Let's do a review of the mechanisms of evolution we've covered. First, I want to go over what evolution is. Evolution is the change in allele frequencies over time. Let's say that we have a population of rabbits. Some of the rabbits have gray fur, represented by the allele G. Some rabbits have brown fur, represented by the allele B. When we first observe this population, half the rabbits are brown and half the rabbits are gray. So the frequency of the alleles in the population is 50-50. 50% gray and 50% brown. Some time passes and we come back to the population and we notice a change. Now, 90% of the population of rabbits are gray and 10% are brown. The allele frequency for fur color has changed. Since fur color is genetically inherited, it's an example of evolution. Note that we don't know why fur color changed. In other words, we don't know what caused the change. We just know the fur color in the population changed. So what caused the change in fur color in this population of rabbits? We've gone over 3 mechanisms that could cause this change: natural selection, gene flow, and non-random mating, and its specialized case called sexual selection. Let's look at natural selection first. Remember, we are explaining how evolution happens by the mechanism of natural selection. Let's go back to our population of rabbits. This population has natural variation in the gene for fur color. Some rabbits are brown and some are gray. This variation probably came about by random mutation and will stay in the population if it's not too important what color your fur is. It's not that much better to be gray or brown. We know that fur color is genetically determined. In other words, fur color is a heritable trait. Now, let's say that some change in the environment exerts a pressure on the population that causes some of the rabbits to be able to reproduce more. In other words, in this population, fur color means that there is differential survival and reproduction. If the environment now allows the rabbits with gray fur to reproduce more than the brown rabbits, in later generations there will be more gray rabbits than brown rabbits. Our allele frequency has changed, and so evolution has happened. Natural selection is very powerful. It's probably why most people think only of natural selection when they think of evolution. Let's look at another example of natural selection. Let's take a population of bacteria. Over time, the population accumulates mutations. Some of the individuals have a level of antibiotic resistance. There is a range of resistance in the population. Note that this population has never experienced an antibiotic before. These are just random mutations that happen by chance and don't affect the individuals who have them very much, and so the mutations stay in the population. In other words, there's no need for the mutation. That's a very important key. Remember, the variation comes first before the need. Now the environment changes. This population is exposed to an antibiotic. Many of the bacteria die. Those individuals who have higher resistance survive this pressure. Those individuals who possess the alleles for antibiotic resistance survive and can reproduce. The others who don't have this allele die. As the population grows, since only those individuals who have resistance are left, they are the ones to reproduce, and the subsequent population now has antibiotic resistance. This population has experienced a shift in allele frequency, and so evolution has happened. The mechanism causing this change is natural selection. Note, the population had the variation first. If individual bacteria are exposed, there's no time to develop a mutation. You're dead. There's no intent in evolution. In natural selection, the variation happens, and then the environment exerts some selective pressure that acts on that variation. If the variation is heritable, remaining individuals with those alleles survive and reproduce, and so the next generation carries those alleles. Now let's talk about another way that evolution can happen. Our second mechanism of evolution, gene flow. Species are usually made up of many separate populations. Some populations are close together and some are farther apart. Some are separated by barriers and cannot intermate. Let's take 2 populations of beetles. Some individuals are green and some are brown. Note that in this case there isn't much advantage to color. It's just natural variation that exists in the population. These 2 populations are separate and rarely mate with each other. Over time, they start to differ from one another genetically. We don't know why. They just do. Our population on the left here has more green beetles, and the one on the right has more brown beetles. Both populations are the same species, but over time, genetic changes may become so great that they become different species. Now let's say a big storm comes into the area and blows some brown beetles over to the green beetle population. Let's concentrate on this population we'll call population 1. What happens now? Here is just that population, population 1. When we began, before the storm, most individuals were green. After the storm, the population has a higher proportion of brown beetles. So the allele frequencies have shifted over time. That means evolution has happened, but this time the mechanism is gene flow. Gene flow can be important in conservation because it's a way for keeping populations genetically similar, especially if we artificially break them up, for example, by building housing development through their habitat. Our last mechanism we'll talk about this week is non-random mating. This just means that individuals choose their mates based on some characteristic. We call the collection of outer traits the individual's phenotype. So individuals choose to mate with certain other individuals based on their phenotype. A special case of non-random mating is sexual selection, which is when individuals choose members of the opposite sex based on some characteristics specific to that sex. On the left is a group of beetles that mate randomly. This population has natural variation in their color. An individual has an equal chance of mating with an individual of any color. There's no preference for one over another. On the right, the brown beetle prefers to mate with other beetles that match their phenotype, other brown individuals. Mating choice is now not random, but based on some outward characteristic. So remember, evolution is the change in allele frequencies over time. Beetle color is a heritable characteristic in this example. Some beetles are light brown, some are dark brown, and some are yellow brown. If dark brown beetles only mate with dark brown beetles, in the next generation the allele frequencies will shift. If this were sexual selection, let's say the dark brown color is preferred by all females. In later generations, or after non-random mating occurs, the population will have more dark brown beetles. The allele frequency of beetle color has changed over time, so evolution has happened. This time, though, the mechanism is non-random mating. In sexual selection, let's say that the female chooses the male based on characters that are only possessed by the male. This preference will drive more males in the population to have those characteristics.